Okay, that's good. It's good. It's fine right there. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janaballabha Giribardari Iyasoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jai Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Om Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jayom Vishnupad Paramhamsa Parvajikacharya Do Tadasata Shri Śrimad Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Grantarad Śrimad Bhāgavatam Ki Sambheda Bhakti Vrinda Ki Gaur All glories to Sambhava All glories to Sambhava All glories to Sambhava All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Ajnanatimidandasya Ghananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupaka Damahyam Didati Swapadantikam Vandehang Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhunam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavan Eshvari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Okay, so I think probably the easiest way is just to do the first one together, and then I'll read the second one by myself because we're doing verses 51 and 52. Okay. Ahod etaj jagat shashta. Aho etaj jagat sashtra. Shukritam bhatate kritam. Sukritam bhatate kritam. Pratishtita kriya yasmin. Pratishtita kriya yasmin. Sakam annam adamame he. Sakam annam adamahe. Aho etaj jagat shrashta. Sukritam bhatate kritam. Pratishtita kriya yasmin. Sakam annam adamahe. Aho etaj jagat srashta. Sukritam bhatate kritam. Pratishtita kriya yasmin. Sakam annam adamahe. Aho etaj jagat srashta. Sukritam bhatate kritam. Pratishtita kriya yasmin. Sakam annam adamahe. Aho etaj jagat srashta. Sukritam bhatate kritam. Pratishtita kriya yasmin. Sakam annam adamahe. Vaishnavis. Aho etaj jagat sasra. Sukritam bhattate kritam pratishtita kriya yasmin sakam annam adamahe aho etaj jagat sashtha sukritam bhattate kritam pratishtita kriya yasmin sakam annam adamahe aho etat this jagad shrashta, O creator of the universe, sukritam, well done, bhata, indeed, te, by you, kritam, produced, pratishtitaha, established soundly, kriyaha, all ritualistic performances, yasmin, in which, sakam, along with this, annam, the sacrificial oblations, adama, we shall share, he, So the translation reads, they prayed, O creator of the universe, we are glad. What you have produced is well done. Since ritualistic acts have now been established soundly in this human form, we shall all share the sacrificial oblation. So we can recite responsively. They prayed, O creator of the universe, we are glad. What you have produced is well done. Since ritualistic acts have now been established soundly in this human form, we shall all share the sacrificial oblations. So that's the Manu speaking. Here is the purport. The importance of sacrifice is also mentioned in Bhagavad Gita, 3rd chapter, verse 10. The Lord confirms there that in the beginning of creation, Brahma created the Manus, along with the ritualistic sacrificial method, and blessed them. Continue these sacrificial rites, and you will be gradually elevated to your proper position of self-realization, and will also enjoy material happiness. All living entities created by Brahma are conditioned souls and are inclined to lord it over material nature. The purpose of sacrificial rituals is to revive gradually the spiritual realization of the living entities. That is the beginning of life within this universe. These sacrificial rituals, however, are intended to please the Supreme Lord. Unless one pleases the Supreme Lord, or unless one is Krishna conscious, one cannot be happy either in material enjoyment or in spiritual realization. So now I'm going to read the next verse. Tapasa vidyaya yukto yogena susamadhina rishin rishir hrishikeshaha sasarja bhimata prajaha. Having equipped himself with austere penance, adoration, mental concentration, and absorption in devotion, accompanied by dispassion, and having controlled his senses, Brahma, the self-born living creature, evolved great sages as his beloved sons. I'll reread that just myself. Having equipped himself with austere penance, adoration, mental concentration, and absorption in devotion, accompanied by dispassion and having controlled his senses, Brahma, the self-born living creature, evolved great sages as his beloved sons. And here's Prabhupada's purport for that verse. The ritualistic performance of sacrifice are meant for material economic development. In other words, they are meant to keep the body in good condition for cultivation of spiritual knowledge. But for actual attainment of spiritual knowledge, other qualifications are needed. What is essential is vidya, or worship of the Supreme Lord. Sometimes the word yoga is used to refer to the gymnastic performances of different bodily postures, which help mental concentration. Generally, the different bodily postures in the yoga system are accepted by less intelligent men to be the end of yoga. But actually they are meant to concentrate the mind upon the supersoul. After creating persons for economic development, Brahma created sages who would set the example for self-realization. Tapasa vidyaya yukto yogena susamadhina rishikeshaha sasarja bhimata prajaha. Having equipped himself with austere penance, adoration, mental concentration, and absorption in devotion, accompanied by dispassion, and having controlled his senses, Brahma, the self-born living creature, evolved great sages as his beloved sons. This section of Śrimad Bhāgavatam, we are hearing about Brahma creating various living categories, we should say, categories of various living beings. And he does it by generating them from his own body in some way or another, sometimes from his shadow, sometimes from something else, sometimes from some part of his body. So this is the nature. It's the drooping microphone. It won't droop as long as this is tight enough, but I just can't get the right leverage to. Yeah. Okay. Now that should get it. What are you trying? No, don't. Okay. This could shorten it. Yeah, it should stay now. Okay. So the now with this being shortened, you have to move the camera. Just rotate it. Yeah, a little. Right there. It's good. Back a little bit. That's good. Right there. All right. So. The various beings are being created by Brahma, and it appears that his own mentality is the mentality of the beings that he creates. Like in the very beginning, he created 5 kinds of illusion, or 5 kinds of ignorance, we should say. And then, he created these beings who were very attached to sex life. And then he created beings from his shadows. And then he created the Manus, and now he's creating the great sages. So he was in a certain consciousness when he created the lusty beings. He was in a certain consciousness when he created the Manus. He was now in a certain consciousness when he was creating these various sages. So it describes his mentality, and then sages are being produced. And of course, the universe needs all these categories of being, because the material universe is designed to give the living entity free control to do whatever the living entity wants to do. The living entity can become spiritually developed, or the living entity can ignore spiritual development altogether. He can do either thing. And if he chooses to ignore spiritual development, he'll go down and he'll be in contact with some of these very lusty beings. He'll become one of those lusty beings, etc. If instead the living entity engages in spiritual life, he'll go upward and become like the great sages. And this is the nature of the material world. Many times people have no understanding of why the material world is so strange, why it's so schizophrenic, you know. And the answer is because it's allowing the living being free choice. If the living being does the spiritually oriented things, his life will gradually get better. And if the living being decides he wants to ignore all that, the life of that being will become worse. And so sometimes one is in proximity of many beings who are spiritually organized, and they will create a good situation for that living being. Other times it's the other way around. A person will be in contact with beings who are very adverse to spiritual life, and therefore he will find engaging in spiritual life is very difficult among them. So, because of all the different permutations of karma that are possible, then we have all this huge category of beings, higher and lower, which have different karmas. So Brahma is in the beginning of the universe beginning to create these different echelons of consciousness and the bodily forms that are the right shelf or the right pigeonhole for that kind of consciousness. So we take birth, you know, in the material world according to our karma. We have a certain karma, and therefore we get a certain kind of body. And now what's interesting here is that we're hearing about rituals and we're hearing about yajna. Now, last Saturday I gave class in 26 Second Avenue. And the verse there happened to be from the 4th chapter. It was verse 428, which is right in the middle of a section where Krishna talks about yajna. And it was a section of Bhagavad Gita that I always found very mysterious, you know, so I decided to do some deeper plowing into it to kind of get a better grasp on what that's all about. Prabhupada throws around some technical terms, and I hope this won't be bewildering. I'm not trying to bewilder anybody. All I'm trying to do is to kind of get a sense of what's really being talked about there. And I could put it in a simple way thus, you know, that if you're shooting a bow and arrow, and, you know, the typical target for archery is this bullseye. You know, you've got a bullseye, and then you've got a ring around that, you've got a ring further out, you've got a ring further out. And the archer, if he's actually expert, will hit the bullseye. If he's not so expert, he'll hit somewhere on the target, or maybe not even hit the target at all, if he's really crummy archer. So in a similar way, that's what spiritual life is like. There are people who know what the bullseye is, and people who are aiming at the bullseye. And there are people who don't even know where the bullseye is, and they're just aiming kind of at random. And there are people who know what the bullseye is, but they can't hit it, you know, so you've got this kind of thing going on. And in chapter 12 of Bhagavad Gita, we find that Krishna gives us a certain hierarchy, you know, always think of me, which is 12.8, and then 12.9, if you can't do that, then engage in the process of devotional service, and this way develop a desire to attain to me. Well, what if you can't do that? 10 is work for me. Well, what if you can't do that? 11 is try to give up some of the fruits of your action. And then we get to 12, which is where we get into meditation and acquiring knowledge, and then renunciation of the fruits of action. So there's a hierarchy, like the target. If you want to go for the target, you always think of Krishna. But if you're not quite able to shoot at the center of the target, then at least engage in the process of devotional service. Again, in chapter 6 of Bhagavad Gita, we have the same concept that Krishna has explained to Arjuna through the first 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita. He's explained to Arjuna that there are these different processes in the Vedic system. You can engage in karma yoga, you can engage in jnana yoga, you can engage in ashtanga yoga, and you can engage in austerities. All these things Krishna discusses with Arjuna. But then, at the end of chapter 6, Krishna doesn't say, okay, Arjuna, just whichever one you have a shine to, whichever one you particularly open to and resonate with, you do that. No, Krishna doesn't say that. He says, tapas vibhyo diko yogi jnanibhyo pimato dikaha jnanibhyas chadiko yogi tasmad yogi bhavarjuna. That better than the tapasvi, the person performing austerity, is the yogi. And he says, better than the jnani is the yogi. And he says, better than the karmi is the yogi. So Krishna is stating a very obvious and definite preference there. It's a preference, He's not saying, do whatever you want to do, Arjuna. He's saying, be a yogi. Of course, the word yoga, I looked it up in Monier Williams. There's a whole paragraph of things that yoga means, all kinds of things, from meditation to process to medicine to trick to mystic power to, it means so many things. It's just bizarre how many things yoga can mean. But here, Krishna using yoga in the sense of uniting with him. So in this verse, that I said at the end of chapter 6, tapas vibhyo diko yogi, the very next verse, which is the last verse of chapter 6, is yoginam api sarvesham madgatenan taratmanam shradavan bhajate yomam same yuktatamo mataha. There Krishna explains what kind of yogi he's asking Arjuna to be. He's not asking him to be a meditational yogi, a dhyanic yogi, a ashtanga yogi. If that were true, then we could say that Arjuna missed the point. Because at the end of Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna doesn't sit down and meditate. What does he do? He gets on a chariot and starts shooting arrows. That's what he does. That's not the jnani yogi, That's not the ashtanga yogi. That's the bhakti yogi. So think about me and act for me. So Krishna is trying to get this point across to Arjuna. So he's making his preference clear. Again, that's the center of the bullseye, is to become a bhakti yogi. Now, all this other stuff is there. We have karma kandis, we have karma yogis, we have jnanis, we have various kinds of ashtanga yogis, we have all these different possibilities. And in one sense, they're all part of the whole Vedic picture. But still, Krishna has a preference, and that preference is bhakti. Now, this target concept, and I've kind of given you two different versions of it now from two different places in the Bhagavad Gita. Now we're going to look at it from the standpoint of yajna. Now, what is yajna in the most sort of basic sense? yajna could be described as going against the normal pull of the senses. That's what essentially yajna is. Now Krishna is talking about yogis doing yajna. So in this case, we're not talking about meditational yogis. We're talking about yogis in the broadest sense of the term, meaning anybody who has any process that's spiritual. So we have these yajna performing yogis, and there's all sorts of different types of it. And is it possible to put this on the screen there if we go to Bhagavad Gita 423, that's what I'm trying to go to. Let me see if I can get there. I got to jump all the way through. This particular section of Bhagavad Gita always mystified me, but it's not actually so mysterious. This is 423. The work of a man who is unattached to the modes of nature and who is fully situated in transcendent knowledge merges entirely into transcendence. So this is starting to sound sort of mysterious. The work merges into transcendence. To put this in simpler words, we could say that the work of someone who is in bhakti yoga is in tune with the Supreme. So he's in harmony with Krishna. He hasn't become Krishna. He hasn't depersonalized. He hasn't melted or something like that. He has had the same basic idea and the same plan as Krishna, so that's what it means. And then we go to the next one. A person who is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness is sure to attain the spiritual kingdom because of his full contribution to spiritual activities, in which the consummation is absolute and that which is offered is of the same spiritual nature. Now, doesn't that sound opaque? That's the consummation is absolute, and that which is offered is of the same spiritual nature. Sounds really, really mysterious. But actually, again, it's the same thing. That by doing things for Krishna, the thing you're doing, why you're doing it, the person you're doing it for are all Krishna. They're all transcendental. So therefore, this is how you purify it. This is the highest kind of yajna. You know who you're offering to. You know why you're making the offering. And therefore, the offering, your attitude, the Supreme Lord, and the whole act of doing the offering, all of them are one in the sense that they're all pleasing Krishna. Now we go to the next one. Some yogis perfectly worship the demigods by offering different sacrifices to them, and some of them offer sacrifices in the fire of the Supreme Brahman. So now Krishna is starting to talk about lesser yogic yogis, so we're doing types of yajna here that are not quite as much on the highest level. So worshiping demigods. Now, a person is performing a kind of yoga. In other words, it's a spiritual process, but Krishna is not directly at the center of it now. Instead, it's the demigods. And the purpose of it is what? To get some kind of material benefit. But Krishna uses, Krishna and Prabhupada use a technical term here. They start talking about something called Dravya Maya Yoga. Now that's something you probably haven't heard in the last 15 minutes. Dravya Maya Yoga. So Dravya are objects. And Maya in this case means based. So Dravya Maya means based on objects. Yajna. It's a type of yajna which means doing something that's against the flow of the senses by giving up some physical thing. So this is a kind of yajna. This is a kind of yajna we usually think. You see the fire, people are putting grains in there. They're giving up some material thing. Of course, most of us don't have much problem throwing a few grains of rice or a few grains of barley or whatever it is in the fire. No big thing. We're not going to cry about it, or it won't really, bother us too much to do that. Maybe the bananas will, if we put them in there too. We could really go for a banana every once in a while. But we're giving up these things. And this is part of the yoga process, or the yajna process, rather, is what I'm trying to say. But Krishna says that Dravyamaya yoga is inferior to Jnanamaya yoga. So we have now two kinds of yajna that are being described. One of them is sacrifice of objects, and the other is sacrifice of intelligence. So Jnanamaya yajna is a sacrifice of intelligence. And later on in this section, this goes from 4.23 to 4.33. That's where this section of Bhagavad Gita about yajna draws to a close. So Krishna is telling us that sacrifice of intelligence is better. What that means is that we are sacrificing our consciousness. Now, for a bhakti yogi, what does that mean? For a bhakti yogi, it means that we are trying to always remember Krishna. So, Krishna is describing that we have to always remember him. We have smartavya satatam vishnu or vishmartavya najatu chit sarva vidi nisedyasyu etayor evakinkara. That always remember Krishna, smartavya satatam vishnu or vishmartavya najatu chit. Never forget Krishna at any time. Sarva vidi nisedyasyu. All the rules and regulations of the Vedas hang on these two principles. Always remember Krishna, never forget Krishna. So if you're doing that, all these other kinds of yajna are not really that important. They're not really that central, because you have come to the highest stage of actually sacrificing your intelligence to focus it on Krishna. So that's the process of bhakti yoga. However, for people who are not really ready to surrender, for people who are not really ready to engage in bhakti, the Vedas offer all these other possibilities where we're surrendering something to someone. So it's a lesser standard. It's farther out on the target. And the farther out on the target you get, the less likely you'll wind up anytime soon at the bullseye. You're somewhere on the target, but you may not get there very soon. It may take you a while to wind your way around, But then Krishna is describing this. So some people are worshiping demigods. At least they recognize that there's a higher order in the universe, and they're giving up some of the fruits of their work or of their, good karma, and they're giving it up to, in this case, the demigods. And this is a type of Dravyamaya yajna. We're giving up. Dravya means articles or objects or substances. So that's what a dravya is, in case you wanted to know. And then some offer sacrifices in the fire of the supreme Brahman. So that's another kind of yajna. But this is a Jnanamaya yajna. But it's not the best Jnanamaya yajna, because one may be simply trying to merge with the Brahman, or simply trying to get mystic powers. This is also possible. So the next one is the unadulterated brahmacharis sacrifice the hearing process and the senses in the fire of mental control. And others, the regulated householders, sacrifice the objects of the senses in the fire of the senses. So we have two different classes of yogis, or people performing yogya here. And in this case, we have the brahmacharis, and they're performing something called Svadhyaya yogya. That's the word Krishna uses, and Prabhupada also uses that in the purport. And Svadhyaya means to meditate on something in the Shastras, or that's of spiritual importance, to meditate on it. So that is a type of Jnanamaya yajna. Then the householders sacrifice the objects of senses in the fire of the senses. So here means that when a person becomes married as a grihasta, they can't just enjoy sex and enjoy whatever they want whenever they want it. So they have to sacrifice that enjoyment. And this is a kind of, we could say, Dravyamaya yoga. But it also has some mental aspects to it. Then the next one is here. Others are interested in the others who are interested in achieving self-realization through control of the mind and senses offer the functions of all the senses and the life breath as oblations into the fire of the controlled mind. So this is Pratyagatma Yagya. So this is what the yogis are doing. This is a completely different kind of yagya, where this is beyond pranayama. You've controlled the asanas, you've done that part, you've done yam and niyam, you've done the asanas, now you've controlled the breath. Now you're actually stopping the desires themselves. You're enough controlled of the entire process of the mental workings that you can watch a desire coming and stop it before it actually gets to you. So that's a very deep level of control, and that's partly possible if one somehow manages to get that far in the yoga system. And that's a different category of yogi. Then we have the next one. Having accepted strict vows, some become enlightened by sacrificing their possessions, others by performing severe austerities, and by practicing the yoga of eightfold mysticism, or by studying the Vedas to advance in transcendental knowledge. So here, again, Krishna is describing these various kinds of yajna, or sacrifice. In some cases, it's, as we said, svadhyaya yajna, you're sacrificing your time to read Shastras. In other cases, you're sacrificing your possessions, Dravyamaya yoga. In some cases, you're doing austerities, Tapamaya yoga, so Tapamaya yajna. So all these are sort of contrasted. All these are possibilities. They are not on the same level, but all of these are possibilities. And so still others who are inclined to the process of breath restraint, to remain in trance, practice offering the movement of the outgoing breath into the incoming, and the incoming breath into the outgoing, and thus remain in trance, stopping all breathing. Others containing the eating process offer the outgoing breath into itself as a sacrifice. Now this is pranayama. This is the breathing aspect of the Hatha Yoga system. This is a type of yajna. So all these performers who know the meaning of sacrifice become cleansed of sinful reactions, and having tasted the nectar of the results of sacrifice, they advance toward the supreme eternal atmosphere. So Krishna is describing all these different types of yajna performance. And they're all good, but he will give his preference. And he says, O best of the Kuru dynasty, without sacrifice one can never live happily on this planet or in this life. What then of the next? So he's wrapping it up here. All these different types of sacrifice are approved by the Vedas, and all of them are born of different types of work. Knowing them as such, you will become liberated. O chastize our enemy, The sacrifice performed in knowledge is better than the sacrifice of material possessions. So this is what we were saying a minute ago. This is the contrast between Dravyamaya yoga, Dravyamaya yagya, and Jnanamaya yagya. Because work culminates in transcendental knowledge. When you are performing some kind of going against the senses, and you come to the stage of understanding that you're doing it not for your own sense gratification, but you go beyond that, where you're doing it not only not for your own sense gratification, but you're doing it for the Supreme Lord, and you know who the Supreme Lord, and that Supreme Lord is Krishna, then you finally come to the center bullseye. So that's from the platform, or from the concept of yagya, this is how we go to the center bullseye. So we talked about it with these various processes, from thinking about Krishna only, then doing devotional service, etc., etc. That was one way we got to the center bullseye. Here we're talking about it from the yoga perspective, getting to the center bullseye. And then in chapter 6, we learn that there's another way to get there, from better than the person who's performing penance, better than the person who is performing jnana, the path of jnana, or the path of penance, or the path of karma. Better than that is the yogi, and that yogi is a bhakti yogi. So this is what we see through and through in the Bhagavad Gita. And here in these two verses that we talked about, we hear again this idea of ritual and about yagya, of sacrificing something so that one can actually become fixed in the Supreme. So I hope that wasn't too bewildering, but we will ask and see if there are any questions or comments,
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Maharaj. I have a question. Can we say that, because the next verse is the famous...
Famous, yeah. Accept the spiritual master.
So can we say that in this famous verse, Krishna gives a shortcut? So instead of going through this gradual and, as you mentioned, possibly very slow process, you could just skip all these troubles and just accept a Uttamadhikari guru who will just give you directly the process of...
Right. That's the intelligent path. Prabhupada said that it's like a skyscraper. So you can get to the top of the skyscraper by walking up each set of stairs. That'll take you a long time. Or you can just take the express elevator and go right up there. So Krishna consciousness under the aegis of a bona fide spiritual master is like taking the express elevator. It's also going to be a struggle, but you won't beat around the bush for so long, and you won't get lost in the building somewhere. You'll get to the top very quickly. And Krishna is making this point, that if one just understands that we are trying to perform bhakti directly. And this is why Krishna says, of course, in the famous verse 1866, Sarva dharma parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja. So give up all this other stuff, this dravyamaya, yagya, this karma, this jnana. All this stuff is for people who are taking the staircase, who are not sure where they want to go yet. They're not clear. They want to give up sense gratification. They're not clear who the Supreme Lord is or whether they care if there's a Supreme Lord. It's for them, but for people who engage directly in bhakti yoga, they go straight to the top. And how do you learn what bhakti yoga is? You learn about it through the mercy of the bona fide spiritual master. Tadvidi pranipatena paraprashnena sevaya upadekshyanti te jnanam jnaninas tattvadarshana. So this is the mercy of the spiritual master. If we hear from the bona fide spiritual master, we don't have to spend time doing these secondary processes that may or may not bring us to the highest level, that are very difficult, some of them. and are not unnecessary for the most part, Still, spiritual life will be a struggle, but at least you know that you have gotten the biggest bang for your buck. You didn't have to go through any needless detours. You didn't have to go through any special hoops that were, you could have avoided. This was the easiest, simplest way to get there. So that's what the process of performing bhakti yoga under the guidance of a bona fide spiritual master secures for you. Any other questions?
What's the most direct way to find a spiritual master?
What's the most direct way? Well, it is said that if one wants to find a spiritual master, one has to pray to the Supreme Lord. The Supreme Lord delivers the spiritual master, and then the spiritual master delivers the Supreme Lord, which is kind of a, back and forth motion, by sincerely asking the mercy of the Supreme Lord. The Supreme Lord will reveal the spiritual master. Of course, we should make an effort to understand what a spiritual master is. If we don't have any idea, we might be misled. And that's why in ISKCON we've developed the IDC, the ISKCON Disciples Course, where you can find out. But of course it's there in Bhagavad Gita and Śrimad Bhāgavatam, what are the qualifications of a spiritual master. And you learn how to judge, because one should not accept a spiritual master blindly. Rather, one should evaluate a spiritual master and come to a conclusion. To evaluate a spiritual master is not a wrong thing until you've taken initiation, and then you shouldn't evaluate the spiritual master anymore. But before, that's the idea, that one is, just as the guru is evaluating the disciple is evaluating the guru, because it's a mutual thing. Just like in marriage, the two people are evaluating their relationship, and then they decide whether or not to tie the knot. Similarly, it works exactly the same way in the process of finding a spiritual master, is that one makes some evaluation and then decides, this is the person I feel most reveals Krishna to me. So that's kind of the idea of getting a bona fide spiritual master. So we had that nice discussion the other day with Tulsi when he was talking about Guru Tattva. So we're kind of back, and I see it's a theme, It's good. We should probably talk more about Guru Tattva.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So, yes, Pandava has another question.
Maharaj, what do we mean exactly by the statement that all sacrifices are for culminating transcendental knowledge? How do we understand this? Because usually
right.
Transcendental knowledge, we are used to, you acquire knowledge by reading books.
Right.
Or by hearing from somebody. But by work, you acquire knowledge. What is?
That's one of the reasons why this whole section was very strange to me for a long time. I had to really kind of, I thought one of these days I'm going to get the time to really, trowel through this and plow it up and figure out what's going on here, As far as I can understand, sacrifices of work culminate in transcendental knowledge. It means that if someone performs these various dravyamaya type yagyas long enough, that eventually they'll get this sense that there must be a supreme being, and that once they learn that there's a supreme being, they will start to figure out, well, who is that Supreme Being and how do I please that Supreme Being? So this is what Krishna is saying here, that if we perform these various kinds of low category yagyas, we'll eventually bump up and become interested in Jnanamaya yagya, and that Jnanamaya yagya will gradually come to the perfectional stage where we'll realize that what we want to do is please Krishna, and we do that by devotional service. And at that point, we can jump on the Sarvadharma Pritya jawboat, at that point, we're not so much interested in all, as Krishna says also in Bhagavad Gita, that the Vedas are mostly deal with the three modes of nature, and then he also says, he talks about the Vedavada Rataha, those who think about, who are attracted by the flowery language of the Vedas. Again, we're seeing Krishna make this point that there are various lower levels for people who are at a lower sense of what they want. They don't know they want Krishna yet. They want material sense gratification, but they're willing to do it in some kind of civilized way. And again, in 12th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, we have that 12:12, I think it is, where we find that Krishna is telling Arjuna that better than, what is it? Let me get there. Yeah, if you cannot take to this practice, then engage yourself in the cultivation of knowledge. Better than knowledge is meditation. Better than meditation is renunciation of the fruits of action. So here, it seems like Krishna is saying the opposite thing here almost. But this is where the nuances of these different individual words kind of get us in trouble, So, better than this practice, Burijan says that this refers not to the previous verse, 12:11, but it refers to 12:10. So it's two verses before. So, better, if you not take to this practice, what practice are they talking about? Working for Krishna. That's what's there in 12:10. And so if you can't take to what's in 12:10, which is working for Krishna, is engage yourself in the cultivation of knowledge. So here, cultivating knowledge, but it's not Krishna Gyan. It's general Gyan, knowing, as Prabhupada puts it in the purport, that we're not the body. So that's very basic, low-level Gyan. I mean, most people in the world don't even have that. But if you have at least the fact, you understand the fact that you are not the body, you're already making some progress. Then you learn that, well, you're not the body, but there is some kind of controlling potency in the universe that's a little higher up. You're not sure what it is. Finally, you come to the stage that higher potency is Krishna, is a person. And so that's there. So better than cultivate knowledge, but better than knowledge is meditation. So this means that we are engaging in a type of meditation where you are trying to focus on the Supreme either in an impersonal way or as trying to reach the Super Soul, which is better. But better than that is a renunciation of the fruits of action, which means one is starting to realize that our action should be for Krishna. So this is this same concept there. We have work, we have renunciation, and we have knowledge, somehow or other, all interfacing with one another. Yeah, usually. Well, there's two kinds of impersonalists, the Brahmavadis and the Mayavadis. So the Brahmavadis are not necessarily at the bottom. The Mayavadis are. Mayavadi means that someone has understands that some people do think of the Supreme Lord as a person, but deliberately rejects that concept. Whereas a Brahmavadi is someone who just hasn't gotten that far along. That's we have many examples of that. The four Kumaras were that kind of Brahmavadi, and when they smelled the tulsi leaves offered to the feet of Krishna, then they became personalists. So that's them, and also Sukadev Goswami. He was that kind of Brahmavadi, and then he became a devotee, and we're hearing Bhāgavatam from him. So that's there. But we have these different things, and we see that in Bhāgavatam and Bhagavad Gita, we hear these things over and over again. There are these different levels of paths, different processes. Not all of them are the same. Not all of them get you to the same place. And there's better ones and worse ones. And if we learn what one's the best, then we don't have to fool around. We make the best use of our time here in a material body. All right, so thank you all very much for your kind attention. All glories to Śrimad Bhāgavatam. All glories to the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. Hare Krishna. Don't. Did you already turn it off? Okay, good. Can you hold this up to where it fills the screen?
On this one?
Yeah. Just hold it there for a few seconds to where it fills the screen. Okay, that's good enough. That's good enough. Yeah. That way I can, because both of these cameras, they really have a different color